This is video 3, Economic Integration. Our source material comes from a study we did under the auspices of the IRC in 2020, and we're most grateful to our sponsors and other supporters. In our other videos, we covered journey preparation, coping with moving, and now we're going to discover more about settling or coping with protracted displacement and integration. In this lecture, we explore how refugees in Kampala integrate into their economic surroundings. We also talk about the need for financial services and how they change over time as livelihoods change over time. And finally, we learn about the biggest barriers to economic integration. Our research questions were, how do refugees in Kampala manage their financial and economic transitions from arrival to longer-term adaptation or integration? Were there phases of an integration process, and if so, what were they? What was the role of financial services in supporting integration, and how might they be improved? So, some background on refugees in Uganda. As you can see, there are a lot. In fact, there are more now than this chart even indicates. This was from 2016. They're more like 1.3 million now. South Sudan, DRC are the biggest contributors to the refugee population in Uganda. We did our research both in Bidi Bidi camp as well as Kampala. We're going to focus on Kampala today, but just to say overall, we interviewed 71 refugees in deeply qualitative interviews, and they came mainly from Burundi, the DRC, and South Sudan. To facilitate our conversations, we created an experience plot together with our interview subjects. We asked them, what was their life like before displacement? What were their highs? What were their lows? And what happened in displacement? And then once they started settling in Kampala, what happened? So for our findings, let's start with what I'm calling a personae, Jean, and Marie. They're a married couple from the DRC. They're both working. They arrive in Kampala with no funds. They receive handouts from the local police station, but their mindset is very, very determined. Marie attends a 7-month course in cosmetology when she gets there, offered by a local NGO. She works in a hair salon for 7 months, earning $110 a month. But even that, which sounds good, is actually too expensive in terms of childcare and transportation, so she quits. She attends a tailoring course, again earning no income. She then starts her own business, buying one machine at a time, but it's slow going. She begins to train others for less than $1 a day, and she earns less than $1 a day from sewing. But she starts selling katenge, which is a very valued cloth. And she also starts a sourcing business for people in Kampala that are too busy to do their own shopping. And for all 4 income streams, she's earning about $130 a month. Jean gets odd jobs in construction fairly soon into their arrival for $2 a day. He begins to learn English, and his income jumps to $5 a day. Then he begins to broker construction materials between Uganda and the DRC, and for that he receives commissions. His business increases, and he can begin to fund Marie's business. So together, they have a balanced household income. Now let's jump to persona number 2. This is Lila. She's Somali, and she's fleeing an abusive relationship in Somalia. She has 4 children. She shares housing with a woman she met on the bus, luckily. Her mindset is proud. Lila washes clothes for less than $1 a day for students over the course of a few months. Then she begins to cook for these same students, and she earns more. She starts work bussing tables in a hotel eatery, where she earns up to $4 a day. And she parlays that into a job working at a hotel where she receives the same $4 a day, but this time there's food that she can take home to her children. Her children get meals through this hotel. It's still not enough to cover school fees, but fortunately, some local Somalian boys pay her children's school fees for her. Livelihoods. Well, we see that ratcheting was visible in Kampala. Income improved over time, not always steadily, as this chart suggests, sometimes in fits and starts, but progression nonetheless. So if you say the arrival phase is the first 2 months, Jean and Marie in this phase are living on handouts. They both begin earning less than $1 a day for menial work, and we're calling this the survivalhoods phase, meaning they're not living purely on handouts, but their livelihoods are not robust. And then more ratcheting begins, and money starts to come into the household from several different directions. And they begin earning more than $5 a day. Now, we are presenting this because this was seen again and again with individuals and with couples. The question is, how can we accelerate the ratcheting process? So before we talk about that, and we talk about the role of financial services, here's a quick refresher. What's a ROSCA? What is an ASCA or a VSLA? And what is an MFI? So a ROSCA is a rotating savings and credit association. They happen all over the world and go by different names. Groups of people, usually 20 members or fewer, gather together and decide to form one of these clubs. So we give a simple example here of every putting in $1, and then one person takes the whole $20 home. Clubs themselves decide whether they're going to meet weekly, daily, or monthly. And each time they meet, somebody takes the whole money home. This goes on until all members have received their $20. Why do people do this? Well, it's hard to save money on your own. There are too many distractions and little needs that crop up. It's easier to save inside the discipline of a group. What is an ASCA? Well, an ASCA is an accumulating savings and credit association. NGOs call them village and savings and loan associations. And here you have a similar situation. People come together for the purposes of saving, but instead of everyone taking the money home, one person taking the whole pot home, the group lends that money out to people requesting a loan and whom the group approves. Typically, these clubs are very simple. Sometimes everybody puts in the same amount. In more sophisticated clubs, you'll see variations on that theme. The key is the fund accumulates over time, and from time to time, the club decides to distribute proceeds back to its members. Why do people do this? Well, people like the access to loans, whose terms and amounts can vary, and they enjoy the distribution now and again of the fund's proceeds, which include what members have deposited, plus any interest earned. An MFI, what is it? Well, it's a microfinance institution. They're similar to banks in that they give loans and many take in savings. MFI give loans for businesses and sometimes consumption purposes. Some give loans to groups, some give loans to individuals, some take in people's savings. All, or most all anyway, charge interest to cover their costs. Why do people like MFIs? Mainly because they trust the MFI to manage their savings well so they can withdraw them from time to time. And they like the loans that are usually larger than the loans of their own ASCAs or VSLAs. Financial services in Kampala. Financial services tend to co-evolve with livelihood progressions. At first, uses for formal services are limited, but as more income comes into the household, or they get their bearings, more use cases crop up. So we see in the arrival phase that services are limited. Cash, barter, handouts, maybe an inbound remittance for the lucky few. Or there's always the mattress for storage. In the survivalhood phase, not much more need for big services, maybe mobile money account for storing cash. And there is early interest in joining village savings and loan associations. However, as livelihoods strengthen, more services become useful. Mobile money is seen as useful for sending and receiving remittances or storing cash. And services from MFIs, like savings and loans, are also seen as useful. And some showed interest in opening bank accounts, although those we interviewed didn't have that option at the moment because most didn't have the correct ID. So let's review the financial portfolio of refugees. Income sources shift over time. Financial instruments also shift over time. So in the red circle, we have money out of the household. And it's simple. It's food, medicine, diapers. This is when people just arrive, right? And their needs are very simple in terms of their financial instruments. There's lots of bartering, cash is certainly used, and their income is really usually mostly from handouts. But as the livelihoods become more robust, so do the number of financial instruments. So now we see the same expenses as before, plus rent, school fees, food, and of course the ubiquitous request for bribes. On the income side of things, we see earnings from multiple things, from selling cloth, soccer matches, from a son's wage labor, from tailoring. And from a financial services point of view, we also see that grow. In this case, the couple has two mobile money accounts, an MFI savings account, an MFI loan. They do have cash in the mattress. They are saving in a Rosca, and they each have a VSLA that they belong to. And from time to time, they're getting remittances from family, and occasionally, if there's a cash flow issue, the landlord helps out by collecting late. So what are they trying to accomplish? Well, as we saw in Portfolios of the Poor, that they're trying to flatten the curves of cash flow. They're taking out the spikes in income and expenses so that on any given day there is food on the table. That's what they're trying to manage, and that's why the ASCA loans are so important. Remember, their income is irregular, it's volatile. Except for in this particular case, the son earning a wage, all their income is unpredictable. And expenses are both predictable, like paying rent, and unpredictable, like medical emergencies. They're also trying to create useful lump sums to manage expenses and expenditures. So paying rent requires that they gather in enough so that they can have that lump sum at the beginning of the month, or buying a sewing machine, or paying for school fees. They're trying to take what little increments come into the house and save up a usefully large lump sum. What are the biggest barriers to economic integration? Well, let's start with documentation. They all need foundational IDs, refugee ID cards. They need this to get SIMs and for mobile money. They need them to open a bank account, for getting MFI credit, for getting a driver's license, getting a license to operate a business in downtown Kampala, and for getting scholarships and in some cases enrolling in school. So the question is, what can be done to expedite issuing the refugee ID card and other permits and licenses? Another barrier revolves around gender. Women often feared violence for themselves and for their children. This fear curtailed their livelihood options. They often didn't feel they could work far from the home, and they often felt that they had to pay higher rents because they needed to be in a more secure housing situation. Some even kept their children from school because they were too concerned. So a question is, how can services be best organized to protect women and children? And one of the biggest barriers was language. So not just learning the local language, but also English and French, but mainly English. People were very appreciative of the language lessons that were being given to them by either local churches, other kinds of places of worship, and certainly NGOs were very active in this area. So, in summary, economic integration in the right circumstances is possible. In fact, many in Kampala were able to progress from pure handouts through stages of livelihood development. Developing social networks was key to economic integration, and that happened through places like the VSLAs and NGO classes. The use of financial services co-evolved with a progression in livelihoods. And finally, the biggest barriers to economic integration were documentation, gender, and language. Thank you.